Hi to everyone watching. My name is Olivia and I am one of the outreach officers at Magdalen College. And thank you for coming to listen to our Tutor live stream Q&A. Whether you're listening live or whether you're listening to this back, we hope that you find this helpful and get the answers to some of your questions. So you can ask us questions in live time on Slido. It should be in a little box probably next to wherever you're watching this on the open day. Or if you're watching this behind, then hopefully someone will ask a question that you find helpful. So please do ask us questions. There are no stupid questions, and we're happy to, and we're going to try and answer as many as possible. But first, let's introduce our tutors. So Kristin, do you want to start with who you are, what you teach, and maybe a little bit about your research?
So my name is Kristin Lightman. I'm a tutorial fellow in music at Magdalen and I also teach at the music faculty. So I'm first and foremost a music historian with a specialism in music before 1800, but I also work on I'm editing musical bibliography, and which refers to the different ways in which music can be represented in written form, and I've generally fairly wide interests in all aspects of music.
Great, thank you. Paul?
Hi, I'm Paul and I'm a tutor in politics at Magdalen and in the politics department here in Oxford. And I'm a political theorist, which means I'm interested in moral, ethical questions about how we ought to structure our political lives together. And I particularly work on the implications of diversity and pluralism and disagreement for political life. And within that, I have a special focus on religion and the place of religion in public life.
Great, thank you. Alexi?
Yeah, I'm Alexi. I excuse me, I have a cough. No, I am a tutor across both physics and engineering here at Magdalen. I was an undergraduate here at Magdalen as well, so I've sort of seen the college from both sides. And my research focuses on magnetism and electromagnetism. So I run a basic physics research group in the Department of Physics here in Oxford. And then I also run a research group that uses the same kind of physics in the service of cultural heritage. So those projects are a bit more applied and have a bit more of a global reach. And I also work with, so I am the college's fellow for widening participation. So I work with Olivia, Amy, and the rest of the outreach team at events just like this one.
Okay, and finally, Joe.
Hi, I'm Joe Sampson. I'm a law fellow. I work and teach mainly in old law. So I work in Roman law, ancient Near Eastern law a little bit recently, but mainly medieval and early modern European law, and in particular, sort of intellectual history surrounding law, how law interacts with theology, moral traditions, and stuff like that. Yeah, so that's me.
Great, thank you all. So our first question is it true that Magdalen is considered one of the more difficult colleges to get into? So in terms of both shortlisted candidates and offers made. Alexi, do you want to start us off with an answer?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So I guess if I'll as a scientist, I'll answer exactly the question which was asked, which was, is Magdalen considered to be a more difficult college to get into? Which I think is true. For some reason, there is a perception that Magdalen is a challenging college to get into. Answering a little bit more seriously, though, now, it's not really possible to generalize about this question because it's a little bit subject specific. So it certainly is the case that Magdalen is a competitive college to get into, but many of the colleges are competitive to get into right across the board. In fact, all of them are very competitive to get into across the board. Some subjects are more competitive than others. Yes, it's important to clarify what I mean by competitive here. So what we mean is that the ratio of applicants to places is high. So that would be our sort of definition of competitive. That is true, as I say, across the board, across the collegiate university. It's certainly the case that there are certain subjects that are particularly popular at Magdalen, but then at other colleges, there are also subjects that are particularly popular. So I think that to kind of summarize the answer, Magdalen is a college that I think attracts applicants across a broad range of subjects. It has some special features. It's a particularly sort of green, beautiful college, I think kind of draws people in as part of that. But you should not, this is not a reason not to apply to Magdalen. The differences that might be perceptible when it comes to these applicants to places ratio are much more subtle and complicated than those raw numbers might suggest, because there are all sorts of very careful reallocation processes that happen during admissions to try to even out the or to effectively even out the chances of getting in for each applicant in each subject. So that means that I think, Olivia, correct me if I'm right, but wrong rather, but I think about 30% of people who apply to a given college, 30% of the people who end up at a given college didn't actually apply to that college. So that it means that the data here it's a kind of complicated problem. Bottom line is, don't worry about it, just apply to the college that you really want to go to. I don't know if anyone has anything to add or a bit more clarity that you might
maybe
want.
Maybe I'll just add one tiny more thing on that, on the reallocation. So in lots of subjects that happens both at the initial application stage, and then also there's a second interview system as well. So at the initial stage, and certainly in PPE, the main subject I'm involved with, all the applications come in, and then there's a system whereby colleges that have a much higher ratio of applicants to places get some of their applicants get reallocated to other colleges with lower ratios there to equalize it across the colleges at the point of interview. And then also within the interviews, you interview at one college, but then we have a system where people can then go and have a second interview. Some people are called for a second interview at another college, which is another way to try and make sure that it's not the case that people have a better chance depending on which college they've applied to. So through both of those mechanisms, these things are kind of equalized a lot more than it might look like if you just look at the initial numbers of applicants to Magdalen compared to other colleges.
Yeah, I always think of colleges as college choices, like expressing a preference for where you want to live rather than applying to a specific, because we mix people around so much. Sorry, Alexa, did you have something you wanted to add?
No, not at all. I think what Paul said was really helpful. I think it's also perhaps important to sort of underline that, I guess, you know, a summary of what Paul and I have both said is that there's a big difference between your likelihood of getting into a particular college for a particular subject and your likelihood of getting in for that subject. So everyone has an equal likelihood of getting into Oxford, irrespective of which college you apply to. And we work very hard at the departmental level and at the college level to make sure that that's true. So you don't try to game the system, I think is probably my advice there. Because firstly, it's not really possible to do that. And secondly, that gets in the way of you just expressing your own personal preference, as Olivia said, which is really, you know, what college choice should be about.
I mean, I can't speak for joint schools, but at least within the single honor schools in the humanities, it is fairly standard that every candidate is interviewed by at least 2 different colleges. So this means that you will always have a backup. And in my subject area, which is music, I should say that we give every candidate, both for so-called first and so-called second choice, 2 interviews, because we want to make sure that they will have the opportunity to do as best as they can. And it's normally the case that one of the interviews doesn't go exactly according to plan. And this is why we give every candidate 2 interviews. So at the end of the process, this should allow us to make a fairly rounded assessment of every candidate, and well, consequently, it is not easier or harder to get into Magdalen than into any other college.
Great, thank you. On a slightly related note, this is a bit specific for you, Alexi, but someone has said that on the website, on the Magdalen website, it says that we take physics and philosophy students if they are very strong applicants. Does that mean that it's less likely to get a physics and philosophy spot at Magdalen than at other colleges?
Yeah, that is a very specific question. I would say that yes is probably the right answer to that question. So and this is something that's very specific to physics and philosophy, and actually, as Christiane has just said, the joint schools are, sometimes are a little bit different than the straight subjects. Now, having said yes, I will qualify that by saying this: if you apply for physics and philosophy at Magdalen, that doesn't mean that you're less likely to get in for physics and philosophy. So all physics and philosophy candidates are considered together, and you will be considered, everyone, irrespective of which college you apply to, is treated in exactly the same way. So you don't need to worry about that. What I will say that's Magdalen specific about physics and philosophy is that just because of the way that we teach our physics and philosophy students at Magdalen, the tutors take the view that physics and philosophy is a very, very challenging course. It is. And we only take people who we consider to be very strong. So at the upper end of the acceptable range, if you see what I mean. Because we only have one student, we find that this can cause problems if that person is struggling, because it's a little bit of a lonely situation to be in. So that means that we set the bar quite high, very high actually, for those places. But again, that shouldn't discourage you. It's not that you have less chance of getting into the university. We will offer you to other colleges that have different policies because they take more students and just teach in perhaps a slightly different way for that joint school. But yeah, that's a real subtlety and quite an unusual situation. Again, it shouldn't deter you from applying, because it's not reducing your likelihood of getting in. It's just that there is a little bit of a special case at Magdalen in that particular joint school.
Yeah, thank you for clarifying that. So a question that I guess everyone can answer: what sets Magdalen aside from the other colleges? Joe, do you want to start?
Sure. I think the answer is actually going to be very similar for every college, because every college says it, but it's really the feel of the place and the community spirit that we have. Magdalen is a slightly eccentric college. We tend to do things our own way, and it means that you get a very strong feeling of like the Magdalen character, the Magdalen way of doing things, which I think students buy into quite strongly. Other things, we've got over 100 acres of beautiful parkland on our doorstep, so even though we're in the middle of the city, you can, well, I look out my office window, I don't see a single building. It's just rolling fields, basically, as far as I can see, with forests. So yeah, some combination of those, the people and the geography, I guess, would make it special to me. Sorry if I've stolen everyone else's answer.
Paul, what about you?
I think, yeah, probably I'd say something quite similar. I mean, I think one thing about Magdalen is that it's a big college, and in one sense it's quite a kind of traditional college in kind of appearance, but it's also incredibly friendly and a really welcoming and inclusive community. So it has the sense of being kind of old and grand, but actually is incredibly friendly and welcoming, and I kind of like that mix. Also, the grounds are amazing, and we have deer. We're the only college with deer, I think.
Yeah, I think we are the only college with deer. Feel obliged to say deer when anyone says what sets Magdalen aside. Kristin, what about you?
Yeah, so we are really blessed with our grounds, which means that Magdalen is a very spacious college, and we have a sizable student population, but it's not as big to become completely amorphous. And from what I understand, also hearing from my student, many students mix quite easily with students from other subjects, and they really feel part of a bigger community. And I think it's absolutely vital, especially when you're an undergraduate student, that you are looking beyond what you're studying in your particular subject area, because you never know where your life will take you after the degree, and it also helps you to make friendships with people who do something completely different.
Yeah. Finally, Alex, do you have anything to add?
It's hard to add too much to that. Yeah, the deer. We have a Twitter sensation family of badgers. I think that's a big selling point. We've got a great tower So all the undergraduates have access to the keys to the tower. You can go up to the top and you can get a fantastic view of Oxford. But yeah, I think more seriously, it is a fantastic community, possibly sort of enhanced by the fact that Oxford Magdalen is a little bit outside of the absolute centre of Oxford. And as a consequence of that, and the fact that all of our students live almost within walls, so that means sort of right inside the college. It's not quite true. We do have students who live sort of on adjacent streets around the college, but everybody is quite close together. And I think that helps to nucleate quite strong friendships actually within the college. So I mean, people do come in from other colleges and people have broader friendship groups, but I think that it's a place that's particularly conducive to people kind of enjoying themselves in strong friendship groups within the college.
You've kind of preempted the next question actually by touching on accommodation and where people live. Someone's asked, colleges like Christchurch offer accommodation in historical buildings. However, many first year students are placed in more modern accommodation. What's the accommodation like at Magdalen? Do you want to pick up on that, Alexi?
Yeah, I'm sure other people will do so too. So yeah, firstly, Magdalen guarantees accommodation for the duration of your degree, which is a nice feature, I think, of the college. Means that you don't have to worry about finding private accommodation at any point during your degree. As I said, most of that accommodation is within walls, and most of the accommodation on the college main site is actually rather wonderful and historic. It varies in, there are sort of 500 years of history represented in the college buildings, and so the student accommodation takes up that full span. However, like Christchurch, we do have a policy of putting most of our first year students outside of the college for the first year in one large building. And I have to be completely honest and say that one large building, we call it the Waynflete Building, is not the most attractive place in Oxford. It's having said that, there's a lot of kind of camaraderie around it. It's sort of, I think a lot of the first years make a lot of friends very quickly because the walls are not very thick, and the corridors, our friendships sort of really are created and consolidated over the course of the first year along those corridors. So yeah, I mean, I'm sure people will want to add something. But yeah, in the first year, we do have a similar policy to Christchurch, and we do also, unfortunately, have a similar 60s not so fantastic building, but it gets so much better from the second year onwards.
But the Waynflete Building is a historical building already.
Absolutely,
that it's one of the few specimens of this type of architecture in all of Oxford. So if you really enjoy 1950s brutalist architecture, then you will absolutely love being in that building.
Yeah, but find a better example.
Yeah, but on a more serious note, it's not just the case that Magdalen guarantees accommodation for all undergraduates throughout their degree. The vast majority of students don't even consider renting privately, which is, I think, a very positive sign that the students are happy with the accommodation offered by the college.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Do you have something to add, Joe?
Yeah, I'm just going to add that once you get out of the first year, there's quite a range of, there's variety, that you can go for historic old palatial rooms in the new buildings where you will have to walk up a few flights of stairs to get to the shower, or you can have an ensuite room in a slightly more modern part of college. So there's quite a bit of variety in the rooms available to later years.
And we also charge everyone the same amount, irrespective of their room, which I think is quite a nice feature. You can't pay for a better room in Magdalen. Go on, Alexi.
No, I was just about to say exactly the same thing, that it's a flat rate system, so everybody pays the same, and there's a ballot system. So what happens is that all names are sort of randomly allocated an order in which you choose rooms. So obviously the nicest rooms get chosen first, and then in the following year the ballot is reversed. So if you get a very late choice in the first year that you choose, which is the second year, you will get a much better choice in the following year.
Yeah, absolutely. So the next question is, to what extent do the tutors you happen to get change the content of what you are taught and your overall experience at the university? Paul, do you want to start us off?
Sure. So I think the answer to this varies a bit between subject. So I say that first. And so the subject I know best, I guess, is politics. So the answer is that it does make some difference in that we tend to have syllabuses that are bigger than we can actually teach, such that tutors then pick which parts they want to focus on. And some of that is done just based on the tutor's preference. Some of it's done in conversation with the students. So I often have reading lists where I set the first few weeks and then I discuss with them which topics they want to do in later weeks. And so that creates a bit of variety, but the kind of core syllabus and content is the same across the university. So, and that's important because the exams are run kind of centrally by the university. So everyone from all the colleges do the same exams, so need to have been taught for the same course. I mean, the other difference it makes obviously is that in a lot of subjects, for the first year of the degree, all your tutors will be in Magdalen, and then often later in the degree, as people begin to specialize, they might go and get sent to other colleges to do particular papers that they're interested in or courses they're interested in, where tutors at other colleges would be more suitable. But given that kind of for the first year, at least, you're probably stuck with the tutors at the college you've applied to. And so that will, create some differences in terms of their style and so on. But I wouldn't say that it's kind of a huge difference because, again, we are still teaching the same courses. Yeah, that's what I'd say about politics, but others might have things to add or change for different subjects.
Yeah, I guess I'll jump in sort of on behalf of physics and engineering. So really very, very similar to what Paula said, except that in the case of physics and engineering, the two subjects I teach, the content is absolutely identical. So there are no differences between colleges. And the reason for that is that all of we call them problem sets, is essentially the material that we go through in the tutorials is centrally set. And this is just a way of standardizing sort of expectations for what people will have studied, and to some extent the style that they will have covered the material in, because that's quite important when it comes to taking exams. So content absolutely the same, style very different. So the way different tutors choose to teach or are inclined to teach is varies vastly across the university, and that is part of the fun of this place. Right? So, you will find that you have tutors that in some cases take a very, conventional approach to subject Y, but a quite unconventional approach to subject Z. And you find that, your preferences as an undergraduate can be very, very strongly flavored by, inspirational tutors in combination with, kind of maybe a way of thinking about something that really meshes with the way that you find it good to sort of conceptualize it. And I can say, from personal experience, I was here as an undergraduate. I came absolutely hating electricity. The thing that was just I knew that I wanted to have absolutely nothing to do with electricity or magnetism. And here I am, some years later, kind of specializing in electricity and magnetism. It's absurd, but it is totally as a consequence of the teaching that I received as an undergraduate, and the kind of different perspective that I got on those subjects while I was here. So yeah, it's an interesting and quite exciting experience.
So if I generalize from my subject music to cover the entire humanities, but basically the content is set by the faculties because they determine the syllabus and they also determine in which subjects students are examined. And it's basically our duty to prepare students for the exams. And there are also faculty guidelines of roughly how many tutorials they should receive on individual subject areas. But of course, in line with what Alexi and Paul had said, there is a huge variety with regard to how individual tutors approach the subject, teaching styles, and so forth. And And I think it's one of the commendable features of Modern that even though we can provide the vast amount of tutorial teaching in-house, we will have several different subject tutors. So this means that you will automatically be exposed to different teaching styles, and everybody has certain quirks, but then they are more conventional in other areas. And so I think this should make it easier for you to find your home, and also carve out your niche, and you can be certain that, well, no matter how quirky you are yourself, that you will connect with somebody.
Law's no different, so I've not really got anything to add.
Brilliant, thank you. So we've got a couple of questions that I'll roll into one, but can we give some examples of any of the eccentricities or unique traditions that Magdalen has? So Joe, you described Magdalen as eccentric, so do you want to kick us off?
I just can't remember the story properly, so I look to people with a better sense of history for me for restoration. But I don't know of any other Oxford or Cambridge college which celebrates beating the crown in a politics battle during the Civil War in the 17th century. And so every October 25th, we have a dinner and there's a special reading and things like that about, you know, how the crown came from Magdalen and Magdalen won, even if the king may have lost his head over it. I don't know if anyone knows the story better than me. I never listened to the speech which goes with it, so I can't do it properly.
Anyone else think of any eccentricities or traditions?
Yeah, I suppose in a so the restoration dinner that Joe was referring to is a really nice tradition. So it actually, the restoration refers to the restoration of the fellows. So basically, just to kind of vastly simplify the story, an outside force tried to impose a president on the college, and the fellows decided that they weren't going to have any of this. They refused to play ball, and they were expelled as a result. And the college was empty for some time, or I'm sure it was actually filled up, you know, and used for some other purpose. And then eventually the fellows were restored and got their own choice of basically regain control of the headship of the college. So there are a few other feast days that reflect important parts of the college history. The college was founded in 1458, so there's quite a lot of history. Some of these traditions go back, you know, to the 15th century. Many of them, though, are actually much more modern. They're 19th century sort of traditions that have developed that kind of reference the college's historical past. And I suppose this all sounds a bit kind of general, but I guess maybe what's more important than some of these, the specifics of some of these events are the spirit that they're taken in. So at some level, they are, I'm going to say that we don't take them too seriously, but that's not to say that we don't really invest in them seriously. So we will have an awful lot of fun on these occasions. And we're really proud of our heritage. You know, we're really proud to be a part of what is a really beautiful and institution. And, you know, it's when you walk around college, you really feel, you know, being in an environment where people have been learning for 500 years, but that is also super up to date. You know, I mean, we have people who are winning Nobel Prizes, you know, in the present time. We have people who are doing really cutting edge research, but at the same time, you know, you can look back 500 years and think about people who were walking through the same sort of corridors, which is, you know, which is really thought provoking. But we invest in these traditions in the best possible way. You know, we have a really good time, but we're not stuffy about it. You know, I think sometimes people think, oh, it's all a bit pompous and people dressing up and sort of taking things very seriously. It's really not like that at all. It's just an excuse to have a really nice time, you know, reflect a little bit on the college's history, and occasionally do a bit of dressing up. But we do the dressing up in a very, you know, sort of lighthearted kind of way.
Yeah, so probably well, one of our other more eccentric traditions is May morning, which was introduced shortly after the tower was completed, which, as Alexis said, is the largest tower of all Oxford colleges, and it was built in the 15th century when the college was still considered a bit nouveau riche. And it basically started at that time that on the 1st of May at the crack of dawn, the choristers and the academical clerks of the choir ascend to the top of the tower, and they basically greet spring with a number of songs. And this has become a really big local event. So especially in the pre-COVID times, but thousands of people would flock to the center of town just to watch and listen to the choir sing.
Yeah, that one's a good one. And there's all sorts of other little eccentricities that like can kind of combine the old and the modern. Like in the hall, we've got loads of old portraits that have just been there for however long, but then we've also got loads of really modern photos of people who are actually in the college now, so like a nice combination of like the old and the new. Yeah, I don't know if anyone had any other traditions that sprung to mind.
Well, I might just like to say that our relation with the history of the college is not an easy one. So we basically recognize that well, over the course of many centuries, good things and bad things happen, and we're not stifled by what had come before us. So we take a very critical approach, but of course we can also celebrate some of the good things or some of the things that basically spur us on.
No, I think that's a really important point, Christian, actually, to say that we're not, I think sometimes people are a little bit anxious that maybe, there's a sort of excessive deference, that somehow we do hold our history, as a place that has a lot of history and kind of uniformly high regard. Of course, that's not true. I mean, there are plenty of things in the college's history not to be proud of, and that's something that is discussed really openly, and I think is also actually a very valuable part of an institution like ours. So we can't change the past. We can't go back and sort of rewrite the actions of individuals who are associated with the college, but we can we can learn a lot from it. And I think by engaging with some of these issues, as well as engaging with the really positive side of our past, we all kind of come together to learn something significant about not only the college, but also who we are as individuals. It's a very I don't want to suggest that our relationship with the relationship with the college's history is frivolous in any way. It's really not. I mean, we do have some fun, but it's also a really important part of a much more thoughtful kind of community that has developed over the last 500 years.
Yeah. Great, thank you. So let's move to talk about admissions now. So someone's asked quite a specific question, but I think we can broaden it out. So will a very high BMAT score, so BMAT being one of the admissions tests, if you don't know, make up for less good GCSE grades as long as the person is predicted the necessary grades at A-level? But I think the real point of the question is, how do things like the admissions test fit into, and GCSEs fit into the whole process and all the different information that you have as a tutor when you're looking at people's applications? So I wondered, Paul, could you speak a little bit about how it all kind of fits together and how we use admissions tests and GCSE grades?
Sure. So there's admission test for PPE, which is the TSA, which is obviously a different one to the BMAT. And then also I teach on history and politics, and they have the HAT, which is another different admissions test that historians do. But I think there's some general things to say, as Olivia suggests, which is that we have a kind of range of information when we're making our decisions. So we have GCSE results, we have predicted grades at A-level or IB or equivalent. We also obviously have the rest of the UCAS form, the personal statement, and so on. And then we have if we do admission, for those that do the pre-test, we have test results as well. And really, we try and take a rounded view and take all of these into account at both the stage of who to invite for interview, and then obviously after the interview, that's another piece of information that goes into the final decision. So for PPE specifically, maybe the TSA plays a pretty important role in shortlisting, so in deciding who we invite for interview, but it's not the only thing we look at. So we also look at the rest of the applicant file in making that decision. And then once we've done the interview then obviously is an additional important part, but it's not like we only make the decision at that stage based on the interview. We still take into account the rest of the application at that point. The other thing maybe to note on the question asked about GCSE results as well, and the other thing to note on that is we also seek as far as we can to contextualize GCSE results. So we consider those results in light of people's background and their schooling, and that often is important in our decision making. So we recognize that people have a range of different backgrounds that will have affected those scores, those results, in ways that aren't really to do with their academic ability, and so we seek to contextualize to that in our decision making. Yeah, I think that's everything.
Does anyone have anything to add maybe for their subject?
Law is almost identical, just really reinforced message. It's a jigsaw, right? We have all these different data points for a reason, but they're meant to tell us all something different. And yes, you want to be as strong as you can across the board, but most people aren't. Normally there's undulations to it, some highs, some lows. And we're trying to get around the view of you as a candidate rather than looking for a killer score in any one area, for example.
No, that's right. And it's exactly the same for my own subject, for physics. We look at everything. All of our information is contextualized. I suppose one thing that's worth saying is that actually includes these tests. So in physics we have a PAT. So the physics aptitude test, we will certainly, when we look at the results of that test against the educational background of everybody that takes the test, and any other factors that are evident to us from the wider bank of information that we have from your application. So as Joe said, it absolutely is. It's just one part of a jigsaw that is considered very carefully. It is absolutely not an entrance exam. So what we don't do is just look at the test, sort of draw a line at some point and sort of consider the top people who the people who are accepted to be the people with the highest score. It's really not like that at all. It's just it's another data point for us to consider in our broader deliberations.
Great, thank you. So sticking with admissions then for a little bit, what do you look for in a personal statement? Maybe Kristin, you start us off.
So, well, the personal statement is called a personal statement for a reason. So it is a statement about you as a person. And so for us, it's much more important that you tell us about who you are, what basically motivates you, what your main interests are, and this could be very specific academic interests, but this could also be wider interests. But what we are not looking for are inspirational quotes, which is of course something that or certain anecdotes, which is sadly the advice that many candidates are given, that they have to open their personal statement for music with something like music is a universal language, which is a statement that is completely untrue in every single respect, and you don't have to trace back your interest in the subject to your early childhood days or even your life in the womb, which sometimes happens in music as well. That's not relevant because we're not offering places to you as a 3-year-old or as a 5-year-old. We are interested to see what your abilities and what your interests are, and also what your enthusiasm for the subject is at the point of application.
Yeah, that's a really, really good point. What about you, Alexi, from a science perspective?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of stuff from my perspective carries over. Unfortunately, a lot of people do exactly what Christian was describing. In my case, it often, or in the case of physics, it often references astronomy. So people who, have been determined to be theoretical physicists since the age of 18 months or something, when they looked out and saw the stars, just don't do that. I would also point out that the majority of people who are physicists did not decide at the age of 18 months, or even, as Christian says, in the womb, that they were going to be physicists. It comes to a lot of people later in life, and you're not going to be judged on that. You're going to be judged on your ability right now, and the real attributes of inclination that you have towards the subject at the time that we're assessing you. So I guess some further top tips. I think Christian really summed it up by saying it's a personal statement, so make it personal to you. Don't just feel you've got to tick a lot of boxes. Tell us things about you that are genuine and personal. Don't try to impress us by saying what books you've read. It's much more important to develop, show us a little bit of your personality and develop some ideas in the personal statement than it is simply to list things. So maybe a good way to think about this is think about the kind of conversation I might try to have with you if I've just read your personal statement. And that's a situation actually that I'm faced with often, when I'm doing admissions. So I'll read your personal statement, and I often try to ask a couple of questions at the beginning of an interview, just to, kind of help us both to relax, because the people who are doing the interviewing are often a little bit nervous because we want it to go well as well. And I will just I'll choose something from your personal statement. And sometimes that's really easy to do. In a good personal statement, that's really easy to do because you will have laid out something in there that I can get hold of that has some physics content. So it's something that as a physicist, I can kind of relate to, but is also something that is specific to you. So, a bad example of something would be, if you just put that you did an advanced extension project in physics, don't tell me what it's about, but list it there. Not really much I can do with that. I mean, I guess I could say to you, oh, I see you did, an advanced extension project. What was that? But, it's not great. But if you say, I did this project which was all about, I don't know, it could be something really basic, Ohm's law or something, that's fantastic, because then I can say, hey, I understand that you've learned a little bit about Ohm's law, tell me about that. So think about the personal statement as a basis for a conversation, and make sure that the conversation it's likely to produce is a conversation that you want to have. So I guess that's my tip.
Shall I say a bit on this one, Olivia? So I guess another kind of angle on this, or another way to think about it, is what the personal statement's doing that other parts of the application can't do. So we already have a lot of numbers and letters based on your results in various things. And we also have a statement from your school telling us how great they think you are. And the personal statement is the one place where you can, as Olivia said, say something personal, give us a sense of why you're applying for this degree and why it excites you and why you're motivated to do it. So we can see that you've done, really well in your exams in all kinds of subjects, but we want to know why it is you've chosen to apply to us to study this thing. So I think a sense of the kind of motivation and interest is really the kind of key thing the personal statement can do. A couple of other things, maybe from a perspective of PPE and other joint schools. So one thing is that we recognize that people might be applying for other degrees at other universities. So often PPEists have applied for things, other universities that aren't PPE. And so that might affect the shape of the personal statement, because obviously you're not writing it just for us, you're writing it for all your applications. And so we totally understand that. So it's not a disadvantage if you're kind of biased towards particular areas that kind of reflect where you've applied for elsewhere. Another thing for some subjects like PP is that it's not a requirement for PP to have studied these subjects at school. So we're not expecting you to kind of demonstrate huge amounts of prior knowledge. It's more about demonstrating your interest and motivation. And it might be that interest motivation is in particular branches of the joint school, and that's okay as well if you're particularly focused on one. We'd expect you to show that you want to do all of them, because otherwise it's a mistake to apply. But if it's more focused on a particular aspect of the degree that interests you, then that can be fine. And the other thing I'd say is just that in evidence of motivation and interest often is things you've done, so things you've read or events you've been to or things you've listened to. But don't just tell us, as kind of the thinker, like I said, don't just kind of list those things formulaically. It's more about explaining what you enjoyed about it, what you got out of it, what you learned from it. And also do be prepared that you might be asked about those things. So don't list books that you haven't read or intend to read at some point in the future. It's important that you really have read them, so that if you're asked about, you know, the argument of some book you've listed, you're able to say something about it. So I would really strongly advise not making claims that aren't completely accurate with respect to your reading and so on.
And I suppose there are some benefits to the personal statement which go beyond its function in the context of an application, because it basically gives you the opportunity to reflect who you are at that moment in your life, and what your main interests are. So we routinely confront our finalists just after they've completed their exams with a personal statement, and they all find it hilarious, because they will have developed in sometimes completely unexpected ways, but the personal statement plays a crucial part in basically taking stock at that part of their career. And it might also help you to decide which course it is that you're actually applying for.
Yeah, I think that's lots of good points raised. And I think I've managed to plug this in every stream over the open day, but I shall do it again. And that is that on the Maudlin YouTube channel, we have a personal statement workshop, which, because if you're thinking about Oxford, if you're a year 12 listening, then you should be trying to start thinking about your personal statement now, because our application deadline is earlier. So by the start of summer, it'd be good to have had a bit of a start. So we think this workshop's really useful. And I should say there's actually other workshops on there. So if you end up getting an interview, there's an interview workshop and all sorts of various resources. So do have a look on the YouTube channel. And there's lots of mock interviews across YouTube made by other colleges or Cambridge University, which the same skills or the things you can learn from watching a mock interview that Cambridge have made is just as helpful for Oxford too. So do look at those things as well. We might as well move into doing a question about interviews, especially because we've touched on it and how important it is to make sure that you don't kind of trip yourself up for an interview by putting something in your personal statement you don't want to be asked about. But Joe, can you tell us a little bit how the interviews work from a law perspective and why we use interviews?
Sure. So again, I think why we use them has got to be the way into it. So what data do we get from the interview we don't get from anything else? And it's really about how you think. So that's the first thing I'd emphasize. Interview is about thinking rather than knowing. We, at least in law, we assume no prior knowledge. I know that's not always the same, but that's because it's a subject you won't have done before, probably. And we certainly don't expect you have done before. So the idea behind an interview is it's going to replicate a tutorial exercise. It's going to see how you deal with the sorts of teaching we offer. And really how your brain works when tested. So things you might do, we might give you a fake statute, for example, a piece of legislation, and ask how you would apply it to a series of scenarios we give you. And can you apply language carefully to fact patterns? How do you deal with it if we change one element of a fact? Can you see what difference that makes? We might give you an extract from a judgment, a case, 3,000 words of argument, for example, and see if you can dissect that argument. Can you take it apart and trace the logical steps one to the next? And can you see where, for example, if we change this element, it might lead to a different conclusion? It's those sorts of exercises. So it's designed to be something you can't prepare for, really. You can't know anything special going in. And there is quite a lot of variety between colleges, I should also say, but it's the same sort of skill set being tested. Yeah.
Bro, does anyone have anything they want to add?
Yeah, I guess only to say that just following up from what Joe has said, that in physics and in fact all of the sciences, the the methodology, and also the sort of philosophy behind the interviews is exactly the same. We're not testing what you know. What we're interested in is how you think. So what we won't do in a physics interview is sort of sit you down and ask you a whole load of spot questions about what the mass of a proton is or something like that. We're not really that interested in whether you know those things. What we'll do is we'll set you a series of problems. It'll be quite conversational. So we'll start off with something quite basic. We'll try to find something that aligns with your interest, which is one of the reasons why putting some honest information about what really interests you in physics in your personal statement is a really good idea. You don't make the mistake, for example, of not allowing your interviewers to give you to help you to choose topics to talk about that you want to talk about. So what happens sometimes is that we might pick a subject out of the air. We might say, hey, how about talking about mechanics? Do you want to talk about, do you like mechanics? Don't say, I absolutely love mechanics if you hate mechanics. Be honest. Say, well, yeah, I'll get, don't tell us you're not going to answer the question. That would be bad. But, don't say, but don't sort of use mock enthusiasm. So, you can say something like, well, I'd be very happy to give it a go, but I have to say, maybe it's not my strongest point. Just be sort of honest throughout the process, and that will be really helpful to you. So in the science interviews, as I say, you'll be set problems. Some of them will be quite open-ended, and as Joe was saying, for the case of law, it's really it's sort of like a mock tutorial. So we're interested in how you think, how you interact with us, and the intuition that you may or may not have connected with the problems that we discuss with you.
Anything anyone wants to add?
Yeah, well, the whole purpose of the interviews is that we will confront you with tasks that create a level playing field for everyone. And so we will normally identify problems for you or give you text to handle, which are completely different from what you would have done at school. And for that reason, it is quite unpredictable. But it's also important to keep in mind that because we are assessing you on your ability to think and also on your ability to learn, that if you don't understand the question or if you feel completely lost, just admit it outright, because then this tells us where you are at that moment, and then we can basically assess you from that moment on. And it is sometimes more important to come up with the right sort of questions than having all the answers ready.
Great, thank you. So someone's asked us, how would you describe Magdalen College with only one word? Which I think is actually quite a hard question. So I'm gonna hand to Alexi. You look most confident that you have a word in your head.
No, I'm really struggling. I mean, I suppose one word without an article, community, right? I mean, that doesn't really describe Magdalen's uniqueness, but I think that it does. That to me is the key message about what Magdalen is, right? So every Oxford college is sort of a little bit like a church. It's not really defined by its buildings, it's defined by the people who are in it. A church is its congregation. Any religious building, regardless of what belief it belongs to, or it is actually the congregation rather than the buildings. So as beautiful as the place is, look beyond that and recognize that actually it's a function of the people who are there here and now. And it is a fantastic community. It's a community with amazing links to every possible sort of area of work, of public service, of sort of influence all across the planet. So I think, yeah, for me, it would be community.
Christian, what about you?
Well, you won't believe it, but I would have said exactly the same. And it's not because I've run out of ideas, but if we have to sum it up in a nutshell, this has to be community.
Yeah, it is a good word for it. Paul, have you come up with a different word, or are you going to stick with community as well?
Well, I think I agree. I think I do have the same word. I mean, I suppose other words might be kind of friendly or welcoming, something like that, kind of reflect a little more about what the community is like.
Joe, what about you?
I'm clearly really antisocial. I'd go for stimulating, actually. Community is nice, don't get me wrong, but I kind of like that in my professional life, no 2 days are the same. I have all sorts of ideas, which I don't think I would have outside of Magdalen, just by interacting with clever students or beleaguered colleagues or whoever. It's a place which keeps on pushing me, and I think it's the same for students, so that'd be my slightly different answer.
Brilliant. We actually had to come up with 5 words for art. If you go to the top of the Open Day page at the moment, it says you can download an at-a-glance document, which will give you a rough summary about, a lot of the basic information about Magdalen. And we asked a couple of students to help us come up with words. And the 5 we went for were immersive, homely, community, enriching, and dear, because it's a unique feature. So it had to be one of the words. But they were the 5 we came up with. Great. So we've come to pretty much the end, but I always end with the same question, and I'm going to ask it again. So what would be your top tip for a year 12 thinking about applying? Paul, can we start with you?
I think one of the top tips for year 12 thinking about applying would be just to go for it, to apply. So I think that people often put off by all kinds of different things, whether that's reputation or maybe not thinking they're kind of good enough. And I think that it's always worth trying and applying here. And there's no reason why you should kind of count yourself out. There's no kind of particular type of person who we're looking for, or particular kind of personality type or anything like that. So I think the main thing would be if you're thinking of applying, then you should go for it.
Brilliant. Joe, what about you?
I was thinking of pretending my connection had dropped to get out of answering the same question. So if you were listening yesterday, sorry that you've heard this one before. My standard one is try not to pigeonhole yourself. We've been hearing from Kristin and Alexi how people say they've been wanting to study the subject since childhood, and that's fine. People do say that all the time, but it's probably not indicative of anything. There's so many subjects out there you've never even thought of. Take the time to explore a bit. Avoid thinking that, yes, I'm destined to be a lawyer or a physicist or whatever, and see what else is out there. If nothing else, it will help sort of cement your interest in the subject you thought you wanted to do at the start, and give you a stronger basis for applying anyway.
Well, Alexi?
Yeah, I'm also going to give my standard answer, which is really kind of related to what Joe's just said, but recognize that whatever you do, whatever choice you make about what you're going to do, it only broadens the opportunities that you have and the options that you have in later life. So if you decide that you want to do physics for the sake of sort of something close to home for me, that does not mean that you are going to necessarily be a sort of a physicist working in a lab somewhere. The whole of the world of experience remains open to you, and only opens up further when you do an undergraduate degree. So I have graduates who have become lawyers, who work in environmental science, who design racing cars, you name it. Any subject that you do is an open door to a whole range of opportunities. So think about what you want to do, not what you ought to do, and how you see your life progressing, because your life beyond university is a series of incredible twists and turns, or will be a series of incredible twists and turns that you cannot possibly predict before you take advantage of that opportunity.
Finally, Kristin.
Yeah, well, I would say be bold. I know that, but we are confronted with so many problems worldwide that it's quite easy to become a bit pusillanimous and to become a bit bogged down. Just embrace the fact that you are who you are, and that if you go to university, you will you will emerge with much more experience, with much more confidence, and you will be able to contribute so much to other people's life, as well as living a fulfilled life yourself.
Great, thank you all for indulging me with your top tips again. My top tip is always to use the resources out there. Like I was talking about the YouTube channel earlier, we also have a resource pack on the Magdalen website. We've got people answering questions for the rest of the day. I'll be answering questions. These guys will be answering questions. So are our students. But if you don't think of one now, you can email us on the Magdalen website. There's a messaging platform where you can send a secure message to a student or to me and my colleagues to get answers. So there's lots of people out there trying to help you. There's lots of resources that you can access. We do, use this summer, make the most of those resources to help support your application, or just to help figure out if this is what you want and this is what you want to do. Thank you very much for listening. If we didn't get round to your question, then you can go over to one of the other rooms. So you can ask the tutors a question in one of the other Slido rooms, and we'll be writing written responses. So please do that to make sure that you get your question answered. But thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the open day.